Well, since the election is more or less over and we're just waiting for the electors in the Electoral College to follow the will of the people, I wanted to cover some of this voter fraud nonsense that's been going around. Today's video is from Bill Whittle and is what we will be using to talk about I haven't always been more towards the liberal side of the spectrum. I used to be conservative and a lot more in line with a Republican leaning, but only just. I have supported both Republican and Democratic candidates and hang out in that awkward central area on the political spectrum usually. As a result, I tend to catch flack from both sides of the political system. When I leaned more Republican and actually thought Trump was a better option than Hillary, which I only thought because of the scandal surrounding her at the time, I frequented Bill's channel. We both have an interest in aviation and can agree on surface aspects of certain policies even today. Obviously, my views have shifted in the intervening years on many of them. I haven't seen much of any of his content in the last couple of years, so I checked to see how he was reacting to the results of this election. What I found was disappointing, to say the least. I found Bill in the past to be reasonable, as in having generally some reason to hold the positions that he does. Biased at times, but they were from a perspective that could be honestly argued from, and from an extent, evidence-based. This video, however, shows that he is letting his emotional response run his reasoning in lieu of evidence. Let's take a look.
The scale of the corruption of the American electoral system is so vast that we have to break it down into several pieces and examine them one by one. And to begin, I'm going to take a fairly innocuous clip and deconstruct it so that you can see how this informational war is fought and how your vote is stolen without you even being aware of it.
Before we move on, I need to address something here which will become relevant as we continue. The only informational war being fought is between news agencies that are more concerned with the bias that they have for one side or the other of the political spectrum. Fair and unbiased news isn't actually a thing anymore, and I don't think it ever has been, at least not in my lifetime. You have to look at multiple sources and weigh the evidence, another aspect that will come up later.
So, Exhibit 1. On November 8, 2020, ABC News chief anchor George Stephanopoulos interviewed Republican Governor Kristi Noem on ABC's This Week.
Governor Noem, thanks for joining us this morning. COVID is rising in your state as well. Cases are up, hospitalizations are up, deaths are up. Are you prepared to work with President-elect Biden to get it under control?
Okay, well, stop right there. The term President-elect has a specific legal definition defined by Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution, as well as the 12th and 20th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution, which calls for an election day to be held, quote, in each state on the Tuesday after the first Monday in November every fourth year. Now, in 2020, that was November 3rd. That is when the people of each state are polled, but the actual election of the president, legally defined, has always occurred on the Monday after the second Wednesday in December, when the various state electors convene in Washington to actually elect the president. In the year 2020, that's December 14th. Now, on that day, the candidate with 270 votes or more is elected president and becomes president-elect from that moment until the inauguration of the president on January 20th, unless January 20th should fall on a Sunday, in which case Inauguration Day becomes January 21st.
Legally speaking, Bill, yes, that is entirely accurate. However, as you well know, the last several elections, dating back as long as I've been alive, and before that, including all, if not most of your own lifetime, have had news agencies referring to the projected winner of the election as the president-elect. I remember you yourself referring to Trump in that manner in 2016, and if memory serves, actually jumping the gun for all intents and purposes by calling him the president before his inauguration. If you refer to your chosen candidate as president-elect before he is legally president-elect, I don't see how you have any leg to stand on when news agencies do what they've been doing for several decades now. If you had such an issue with it as you seem to now, you would have said something in 2016 when news agencies were saying the same thing about Trump. I thought you were above the double standard, but apparently not when it comes to politics. If you're going to nitpick, at least be consistent with what nit you pick. Legally, yeah, at this point, Biden is, to quote you, just some guy. Just like Trump was just some guy in 2016, or Obama was just some guy in 2008. Do you see the problem here, Bill?
Now, at 4:30 p.m. on Election Day, the New York Times issued the following tweet, quote, "The role of declaring the winner of a presidential election falls to the news media. The broadcast networks and cable news outlets have vowed to be prudent. Here's how it will work." This isn't just incorrect, and it isn't just fraudulent. It's the declaration of a coup d'etat. The media does not select the president. The fact that the New York Times said such a thing means that millions and millions of people have come to believe that that's how things actually work. Now, you think I'm overstating the case when I say it's a coup? Think about it this way. What if he'd written, "The role of declaring the winner of a presidential election falls to the National Rifle Association. Now pay attention, because here's how it's going to go."
You're equivocating the dispersal of information with news agencies actually choosing the president, Bill. And this feeds into the earlier point where, for the last several decades, the news has declared one candidate over the other to be the winner based on the information they've gathered. You didn't have a problem with the news declaring Trump the winner of the last election, so don't start bitching about wording now. You know damn well that isn't how that works, so don't mislead your audience on it. You're free to have your opinion, but if you want to call this a lie, you not only have to hold everyone from every news agency that covered every prior election to the same standard, but you have to show it was with intent to deceive, which your broken dreams of a second Trump term don't show. It's just you being pissed off that an incompetent, white supremacist, narcissistic moron has, by all indications, lost. He even lost the military vote. You and I both know you gotta fuck up pretty hard to pull that off as a Republican.
You know, it's a shame to have to skip Governor Noem's excellent reply to the COVID question, but we'll come back to COVID in a later installment. Right now, let's go 45 seconds into the interview.
Election day needs to be fair, honest, and transparent. And we need to be sure that we had an honest election before we decide who gets to be in the White House the next 4 years.
Governor Noem, do you have any evidence that it wasn't an honest election? You had a tweet earlier this week saying it was rigged. Do you have any evidence at all of widespread fraud? I've spoken with Republican secretaries of state in Georgia, in Arizona. I've spoken to Republican officials across the country. They have come up with zero evidence of widespread fraud.
Here's a news flash for you, Anchorman. It's not the governor's job to prove to you and your news suppression agency that your assertion is correct. Finding out whether or not there was widespread voter fraud is your f***ing job, not hers.
Goddamn right, Bill. It is his fucking job. Why do you think he's asking her to back up her fucking claims of voter fraud? Because he's doing his fucking job. If someone claims there's been widespread voter fraud, they'd better be able to back that up with some fucking evidence. That's why all but one lawsuit brought to bear by the Trump administration, as of this recording, that is 1 out of 39, has been slapped down. The one suit that had some staying power was a complaint about distance from the counting and the number of observers allowed. So let's see that evidence, Bill. Where's that evidence of widespread voter fraud?
They have come up with zero evidence of widespread fraud.
And that is not true. That is absolutely not true. People have signed legal documents, affidavits stating that they saw illegal activities. And that is why we need to have this conversation in court. The New York Times itself said that there were clerical errors. If
No
you look at what happened in
widespread
Michigan,
fraud, Governor. That's
that
very
we had
different.
computer glitches that changed Republican votes to Democrat votes. You look in Pennsylvania, dead people voted in Pennsylvania.
Go on, Bill. Let's see what you've got to say before I correct you, because there's a lot of that coming.
Let's assume that you're an American voter who didn't watch the interview, and all you saw was this tweet. It states that Governor Kristi Noem does not provide any evidence to support claims of voter fraud. That is false. That is a lie. That is a fraudulent statement intended to mislead the public. She provided numerous credible pieces of evidence before she was cut off by the miniature Democratic Party operative sitting on a stack of cushions pretending to be a journalist.
Is that right? Did I miss some evidence she presented? Let's look back at the clip, Bill.
They have come up with zero evidence of widespread fraud.
And that is not true. That is absolutely not true. People have signed legal documents, affidavits stating that they saw illegal activity.
Let's pause here because as we saw before, this gets kind of jumbled with them talking over each other. Bill, a signed affidavit is just a claim made on a legal document, but it's still just a claim nonetheless. People lie, Bill. I'm sure you've heard of perjury. Just because you give a sworn affidavit doesn't mean you're telling the truth. It doesn't mean you lied either, but the point is that it isn't evidence any more than you saying you saw something is. A couple of the affidavits are truly worthless. A fucking post-it note or an anecdote from a friend of a friend who is unidentified and apparently non-existent isn't evidence, even when it's a signed affidavit statement saying that they saw this shit, Bill.
And that is why we need to have this conversation in court. The New York Times itself said that there were clerical errors.
Clerical errors are just that, Bill. Clerical errors. No malicious intent, just an accidental misfiling or a typo. It happens to everyone, otherwise the backspace key wouldn't exist, and neither would whiteout or erasers. People screw up, Bill. Just because a mistake was made doesn't mean there was any malicious intent behind it. That's what needs to be proven.
Computer glitches that changed Republican votes to Democrat votes. You look in Pennsylvania, dead people voted in Pennsylvania.
Computer glitches have been a thing since computers were invented, and this election isn't the first time it's allegedly happened. It happens, or allegedly happens, literally every election since they were first implemented. The dead people voting is another flimsy claim. People mailed in ballots, a lot, and then died before they were counted. This is common among both civilians and military personnel. This is another one of those things that pops up every election cycle, seemingly. Oddly enough, the few confirmed cases of actual voter fraud in this election, to my knowledge, are by Republicans fraudulently voting for Trump on behalf of dead relatives, oddly enough, or relatives that are alive that they simply stole the ballot of and voted on their behalf. Again, which is fraudulent. Such an operation of widespread voter fraud would stand out more than the handful of actual cases we have, and there would be evidence of it. The tweet beside Bill here is largely irrelevant. It does contain some spelling and grammatical errors and lists Governor Noem as the governor of North Dakota instead of South Dakota, all of which he bitches about. But the statement that she provided no evidence to back up the claim of widespread voter fraud is factually accurate, as I have just shown, despite how much Bill wants to bitch about it. Now, I did cut him off before that rant about the tweet, but he's still got a bit left in it.
And obviously, it's not just ABC. The stolen election begins with political propaganda designed to influence people's votes under the fraudulent claim of being unbiased news. There is no free and fair press in this country, and there hasn't been for decades. All we have now are various editions of American Pravda.
I did mention that lack of unbiased news earlier, didn't I? I do, however, note that you aren't holding, say, Fox News accountable for helping to back the president's misinformation. I also noticed that you are nowhere near as critical of Trump as you were with Obama and will be with Biden. You complain about bias in the press, but you don't see that bias in yourself. Something I find incredibly telling, Bill. You aren't evaluating things based on evidence or actions. You're evaluating things based on party lines. We have an extremely divisive two-party system in place in this country, in the legislative branch in particular, so getting anything done is like pulling teeth. Instead of putting the good of the people and the nation first, people on both sides are fighting over the inclusion of things in bills that have fuck all to do with what the bill is supposed to deal with. We had some semblance of balance in the judicial branch, but with the appointment of Barrett, somebody who couldn't name the protections afforded in the First Amendment, mind you, that delicate balance is gone. I've seen the policies of Republicans at work, at the ground level. I have to deal with them. While Democrats certainly aren't perfect in their policies, the reason they are usually so extreme is because they have to, on both sides, retain the support of their party members. No one is willing to compromise anymore, to reach across the political aisle, to do something that actually benefits the people they represent. See, Bill, you and I could come to some agreement and compromise on issues. We can agree that certain measures need to be taken. And I'm not going to start off that conversation with, we need to ban all guns. Nor do I think you're batshit crazy enough to lead with, we should own any firearm without any registration. Most of us operate in a middle ground. And most of us in that area are flexible enough to agree to some give and take with things that are relevant to the topic. If you want any firearms to be available for purchase, then I expect there to be a background check that flags for known associates, among other things, and that there be a mandatory firearms handling and proficiency test, along with a test on local ordinances and laws concerning firearm usage and storage, along with a requirement of some kind of security to deter theft and prevent easy unauthorized use. Conditions I'm sure you would be on board with. Red tape, yes, but a small price to pay for what you want. If we can do that, we need to hold our elected officials accountable and make sure they do the same thing instead of just stalemating each other at every turn, it seems, so nothing gets done. We don't need an us versus them mentality, Bill. We need cooperation on both sides. We need people to sit down and actually talk about improving the quality of life for everyone, making sure that everyone's rights are protected and treating each other like human beings, not adversaries to be battled. The country hasn't been lost, Bill. We've taken the first steps in 4 years to repairing the country, repairing the damage that has been done by Trump. I'm glad he lost because he is the absolute worst thing that has happened to this country in my lifetime. So stop bitching, Bill. Trump lost. Get over it.